45 men have held the office of President of the United States. 39 of them are dead. And some of those deaths? Well, they're not what you'd expect. What if I told you that one president was dug up from his grave 140 years after he died, just to see if he was murdered? What if I told you another president died so mysteriously that his own wife refused to let doctors examine the body? And what are the odds that two founding fathers would die on the exact same day, the 50th anniversary of America's birthday, within hours of each other? Some call it coincidence. Others call it impossible. I'm going to take you inside the most shocking, mysterious, and downright bizarre presidential deaths in American history. We're talking assassinations, cover-ups, medical disasters, and coincidences so strange they'll make your head spin. From the president who was killed by his own doctors, to the one who might have been poisoned by his wife, to the assassination that spawned 1,000 conspiracy theories and counting. These aren't just history lessons, these are mysteries. And some of them? They're still unsolved. Over the next hour, we're going to examine the evidence, hear from the experts, and ask the questions that official investigations sometimes avoided. Because when the most powerful person in the world dies unexpectedly, nothing is ever simple. Hey everyone! Before we dive into these incredible stories, if you're fascinated by the mysteries and untold secrets of American history and crime like I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, after what you're about to hear, you'll want to stick around for more. And here's the thing, we're going to go through these cases with fresh eyes. No politics, no agenda, just the facts, the evidence, and the questions that still keep historians up at night. Starting with the case that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. This case that's haunted America for over 60 years. The death that spawned more conspiracy theories than any other event in modern history. The assassination that proved sometimes the official story just doesn't add up. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was living the American dream. At 43, he was the youngest man ever elected president. War hero, Harvard graduate, beautiful wife, 2 young kids. The press called it Camelot. But on November 22, 1963, the dream became a nightmare. Kennedy was riding through Dallas in an open-top Lincoln Continental, waving at cheering crowds. His wife Jackie sat beside him. They were heading to a luncheon at the Trade Mart. At exactly 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade crawled through Dealey Plaza at just 11 miles per hour, 3 shots shattered the afternoon air. Kennedy lurched forward, then his head exploded backward in a spray of blood and brain matter. Jackie screamed and climbed onto the trunk of the speeding car. By 1 p.m., John F. Kennedy was declared dead. The most powerful man on earth had been killed by a nobody with a mail-order rifle. Within 90 minutes, police arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old loner who worked at the Texas School Book Depository, the building where the shots allegedly came from. Case closed, right? Wrong. 2 days later, as millions watched on live television, nightclub owner Jack Ruby walked up to Oswald in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters and shot him dead. The only suspect was now silenced forever. This is where the story gets really weird. President Johnson quickly assembled the Warren Commission to investigate. 10 months later, they delivered their verdict. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. 3 shots, 1 gunman. End of story. But the evidence told a different tale. Abraham Zapruder had been filming the motorcade with his 8mm camera. His footage captured the moment that changed everything. Frame 313 showed Kennedy's head snapping violently backward and to the left. Here's the problem. If someone shoots you from behind, physics says you fall forward. Kennedy fell backward. The Warren Commission claimed this was a neuromuscular reaction. Critics called it impossible. Then came the magic bullet theory. The commission insisted that 1 bullet had hit Kennedy in the back, exited his throat, then somehow changed direction in midair, hit Texas Governor John Connally in the back, shattered his wrist, and ended up in his thigh. 1 bullet, 7 wounds, 2 men. The bullet they found was almost perfectly intact. Even seasoned investigators shook their heads. How does a bullet cause that much damage and remain virtually undamaged? The witness testimony was equally troubling. Of the 178 people in Dealey Plaza that day, 61 said the shots came from the grassy knoll in front of Kennedy, not from behind where Oswald supposedly was. Multiple witnesses reported seeing men with rifles behind the wooden fence. Others saw suspicious smoke rising from the knoll. The Warren Commission dismissed all of this. The timeline didn't work either. The commission claimed Oswald fired 3 accurate shots in just 6.1 seconds with a bolt-action rifle. When FBI marksmen later tested identical rifles, none could match this feat with any accuracy. Oswald's military records showed he was barely qualified with a rifle. His Marine instructors remembered him as a poor shot who often missed easy targets. The autopsy raised even more questions. It was performed by doctors with zero forensic experience. The photographs were poorly taken. Key measurements were wrong. And then, incredibly, Kennedy's brain simply vanished from the National Archives. How do you lose a president's brain? The Secret Service immediately ordered Kennedy's limousine cleaned and rebuilt, destroying potential evidence. The crime scene was altered within hours. Then witnesses started dying. Between 1963 and 1967, 18 people connected to the case died under various circumstances. Heart attacks, suicides, car accidents. A London actuary calculated the odds of this happening naturally, 100,000 trillion to 1. By 1976, even Congress had doubts. The House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the case and reached a stunning conclusion. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Their evidence? Acoustic analysis suggested 4 shots had been fired, not 3. That meant a second shooter. Later analysis disputed this finding, but the damage was done. The official story had cracked. The theories exploded. The CIA killed Kennedy because he wanted out of Vietnam. The Mafia killed him because his brother Bobby was cracking down on organized crime. Cuban exiles killed him because he wouldn't invade Cuba. Lyndon Johnson killed him to become president. Over 2,000 books have been written about November 22nd. Polls consistently show most Americans believe there was a conspiracy. So what really happened in Dallas? Here's what we know for certain. John F. Kennedy was shot and killed. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. Jack Ruby killed Oswald. Everything else is disputed. The magic bullet defies physics. The Zapruder film contradicts the official trajectory. Witness testimony points to multiple shooters. Evidence was destroyed. Witnesses died. The investigation was rushed. Maybe the conspiracy theories persist because the official explanation has too many holes. Maybe because too much evidence vanished. Maybe because the idea that a loser with a cheap rifle could change history is too meaningless to accept. Or maybe because 60 years later, the government still won't release all the files. What are they hiding? The Warren Commission records are sealed until 2029. Even then, will we finally learn the truth? John F. Kennedy's assassination remains America's greatest unsolved mystery. The case that proves sometimes the official story is just the beginning of the questions, not the end of them. And those questions aren't going away anytime soon. Number 2. Abraham Lincoln. Our next case takes us back to the moment America first learned that presidents could be murdered. The night that changed everything and launched the most dramatic manhunt in U.S. history. Abraham Lincoln had just saved the country. After 4 years of brutal civil war, the Union had finally defeated the Confederacy. Slavery was abolished. The nation was healing. Lincoln was planning reconstruction, dreaming of binding up the nation's wounds. But not everyone wanted the country to heal. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Lincoln decided to do something normal for once. He wanted to see a play. His wife Mary had been begging him to take a break from the crushing weight of war. So they headed to Ford's Theater to watch Our American Cousin, a popular comedy. Lincoln was in a great mood that night. The war was over. His son Robert had just returned home safely from the army. For the first time in years, the president seemed genuinely happy. He had no idea that one of America's most famous actors was planning to kill him. John Wilkes Booth was a celebrity. Think Brad Pitt famous. He was handsome, charismatic, and came from America's most celebrated acting family. Women swooned over him. Men wanted to be him. But Booth was also a die-hard Confederate sympathizer who believed Lincoln had destroyed the South. As the war ended, his rage only grew stronger. The original plan wasn't assassination. Booth had been plotting to kidnap Lincoln for months, to trade him for Confederate prisoners. But when Lee surrendered at Appomattox, kidnapping became pointless. So Booth decided on murder. On the morning of April 14th, Booth learned that Lincoln would be at Ford's Theater that night. This was perfect. Booth knew every inch of the theater. He had performed there dozens of times. The staff loved him. He could walk in anywhere, anytime. That evening, as Act 3 began, Booth made his move. He knew the play by heart. He knew exactly when the audience would be laughing loudest. At 10:15 p.m., as actor Harry Hawk delivered the line that always got the biggest laugh, Booth slipped into the presidential box. Lincoln sat in a rocking chair, his wife Mary beside him. Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris were their guests. None of them heard Booth approach. Booth pulled out a small Derringer pistol, placed it behind Lincoln's left ear, and fired. The bullet tore through Lincoln's brain and lodged behind his right eye. The president slumped forward, unconscious. Major Rathbone lunged at Booth, but the actor was ready. He pulled out a hunting knife and slashed Rathbone's arm to the bone. Then Booth leaped from the presidential box onto the stage 12 feet below. His spur caught in a Treasury flag, and he landed hard, breaking his left leg. But Booth was a showman to the end. Despite the pain, he turned to the stunned audience and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis! Thus always to tyrants!" Virginia's state motto. Then he limped off stage, mounted his horse, and disappeared into the night. The theater erupted in chaos. Mary Lincoln screamed. Major Rathbone was bleeding everywhere. Someone yelled, "The president has been shot." Dr. Charles Laley, a young army surgeon in the audience, rushed to the box. Lincoln had no pulse. His breathing was shallow and irregular. The doctor knew immediately. The president was dying. They couldn't move Lincoln back to the White House. He wouldn't survive the carriage ride. So they carried him across the street to a boarding house owned by William Peterson. For 9 agonizing hours, Lincoln fought for life. His breathing came in rattling gasps. Mary wept at his bedside. His son Robert stood watch. Cabinet members and generals filled the tiny room. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln took his last breath. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton spoke the words that would echo through history. Now he belongs to the ages. But this was just the beginning of the story. While Lincoln lay dying, the manhunt for Booth was already underway. And investigators quickly discovered something terrifying. This wasn't the work of a lone madman. Booth had conspirators, lots of them. The same night Lincoln was shot, another conspirator, Lewis Powell, broke into Secretary of State William Seward's home and nearly killed him with a knife. Seward was bedridden from a carriage accident, and Powell slashed his face and throat before escaping. A third conspirator, George Atzerodt, was supposed to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson but lost his nerve and got drunk instead. This was a coordinated attack on the entire U.S. government. If all 3 assassinations had succeeded, the federal government would have been decapitated. The manhunt for Booth became the largest in American history up to that point. Thousands of soldiers, detectives, and bounty hunters scoured Maryland and Virginia. A $100,000 reward was offered, worth millions today. For 12 days, Booth stayed one step ahead of his pursuers. Despite his broken leg, he managed to evade capture with help from Confederate sympathizers who hid him in barns and safe houses. But on April 26th, soldiers finally tracked him down to a tobacco barn in rural Virginia. They surrounded the barn and demanded Booth's surrender. He refused. "I will not be taken alive," he shouted. The soldiers set the barn on fire to force him out. Through the flames, they could see Booth hobbling around inside, rifle in hand, preparing for his final scene. Then Sergeant Boston Corbett, against direct orders, shot Booth through a gap in the barn wall. The bullet severed his spinal cord, paralyzing him. As Booth lay dying, he whispered his last words, "Tell my mother I died for my country." But the conspiracy was bigger than anyone imagined. The government rounded up hundreds of suspects. The trial revealed a web of Confederate agents, sympathizers, and plotters who had been planning attacks on Union leaders for months. 8 conspirators were tried by a military tribunal. 4 were hanged, including Mary Sorrett, who became the first woman executed by the federal government. Her boarding house had been the conspirators' meeting place. The investigation uncovered evidence that the Confederate government may have been involved. Some historians still debate whether Confederate President Jefferson Davis knew about the plot. What we know for certain is this: John Wilkes Booth didn't act alone. He was part of a broader conspiracy to destroy the U.S. government at its moment of victory. Lincoln's assassination changed America forever. It was the first time a president had been murdered. It shattered the nation's sense of security and innocence. The man who had saved the Union, who had freed 4 million slaves, who had held the country together through its darkest hour, was gunned down by a celebrity who couldn't accept that his cause was lost. Abraham Lincoln died as he had lived, serving his country. But his death proved that in America, even presidents weren't safe from the hatred and violence they were trying to heal. The first presidential assassination, but sadly not the last. Number 3, Warren G. Harding. Now we come to the most suspicious natural death in presidential history. A case where the cover-up began before the body was even cold. This is the story of a president who died with too many secrets, and a wife who made sure those secrets stayed buried. Warren G. Harding was never supposed to be president. He was a small-town newspaper publisher from Ohio who looked presidential but had no business running the country. His own campaign manager called him a damn fool. But in 1920, America was tired of war and Wilson's moral crusades. They wanted normalcy, and Harding promised exactly that. He won in a landslide. What America got instead was the most corrupt administration in history. Harding surrounded himself with crooks and con men. His buddies looted the government like it was their personal piggy bank. The Teapot Dome scandal, the Veterans Bureau scandal. Kickbacks, bribes, and stolen oil reserves. But Harding's biggest scandal wasn't financial, it was personal. While his wife Florence battled kidney disease, Harding was having affairs. Multiple affairs. His mistresses included his best friend's wife and a woman 30 years younger who claimed he had fathered her child. He wrote steamy love letters that would make a porn star blush. Letters that could have destroyed his presidency if they ever became public. By the summer of 1923, Harding's world was collapsing. Congressional investigations were closing in on his corrupt cabinet. Newspapers were sniffing around his affairs. Friends were preparing to testify against him. That's when Harding decided to take a cross-country train trip to Alaska. He called it a voyage of understanding. Others called it running away. The president looked terrible. He was pale, exhausted, and clearly under enormous stress. His doctor begged him to cancel the trip. Harding refused. On the journey west, strange things started happening. In Kansas City, Harding received a long-coded telegram. After reading it, he turned ashen and asked his secretary, "What would you do if you knew of a great scandal about to break?" The secretary suggested getting the facts out first. Harding shook his head. "This is different. This scandal involves people close to me." What was in that telegram? Nobody knows. It disappeared. In Alaska, Harding grew sicker. He complained of stomach pain and fatigue. His hands shook. He looked like a man carrying an unbearable burden. The presidential party cut the trip short and headed to San Francisco. Harding needed rest and medical care. They checked into the Palace Hotel on July 29th. The president's condition seemed to improve. His personal physician, Dr. Charles Sawyer, diagnosed food poisoning from bad crab meat. But other doctors disagreed. They thought it was his heart. On August 1st, Harding felt well enough to sit up in bed while his wife Florence read him newspaper articles. He was actually laughing at a positive editorial about his policies. Then, without warning, he shuddered and collapsed. Florence screamed for help, but it was too late. At 7:35 p.m. on August 2, 1923, Warren G. Harding was dead. He was 57 years old, and that's when things got really weird. Dr. Sawyer immediately announced the cause of death: apoplexy, a stroke. But the other physicians present disagreed. They wanted an autopsy to determine the real cause. Florence Harding said no. She refused to allow any autopsy. She wouldn't even permit the standard examination that was routine for any suspicious death. Her husband's body would not be touched. Why? She never explained. Within hours, Florence began destroying evidence. She burned boxes of Harding's personal papers, including all his correspondence. Love letters, political documents, anything that might reveal secrets. It all went into the fire. She spent the entire train ride back to Washington burning papers in the baggage car. Smoke poured from the presidential train as it crossed the country. What was she hiding? Rumors started immediately. Harding had been poisoned. His wife had killed him to save the family from scandal. His mistresses had blackmailed him into suicide. His corrupt cronies had silenced him before he could talk. The stories got wilder. Some claimed Florence had given him poison disguised as medicine. Others said his doctor was in on it. A few even suggested the coded telegram contained a death threat, but without an autopsy, there was no way to prove anything. Florence's behavior only fueled more suspicion. She refused to discuss her husband's death with anyone. She destroyed more papers after returning to Washington. When reporters asked questions, she clammed up completely. The official cause of death kept changing. First it was food poisoning, then a stroke, then a heart attack, then an embolism. The doctors couldn't seem to get their story straight. Dr. Sawyer, Harding's personal physician, had a particularly suspicious background. He was a homeopath with questionable credentials who had no business treating a president. Real doctors had been pushing for his removal for months. Even more suspicious, Dr. Sawyer died suddenly just 1 year after Harding, taking his secrets to the grave. The timing of Harding's death was incredibly convenient for a lot of people. His corrupt cabinet members avoided prison. His mistresses avoided scandal. His party avoided electoral disaster. And Florence? She became a wealthy widow who never had to watch her husband get impeached. For decades, the mystery deepened. In 1930, a woman named Nan Britton published a tell-all book claiming Harding had fathered her daughter. She described secret meetings in White House closets and hush money payments. The book was banned in many cities, but it revealed just how much Harding had to hide. Then, in 1964, more love letters surfaced. Hundreds of pages of explicit correspondence between Harding and his best friend's wife. The letters proved Harding was capable of enormous deception. If he could lie to his wife and best friend for decades, what else was he hiding? Modern historians have tried to solve the mystery, but Florence destroyed too much evidence. We'll never know what was in those burned papers or why she was so determined to prevent an autopsy. Some medical experts today believe Harding died of a heart attack brought on by stress. The corruption scandals, the blackmail threats, the fear of exposure, it was all too much for his weak heart. Others point to the suspicious circumstances. The convenient timing, the refused autopsy, the destroyed evidence. The changing stories. Was Warren G. Harding murdered? We'll never know for certain. But one thing is clear, Florence Harding made damn sure we'd never know. Her husband died with his secrets and she burned the rest. It remains the most suspicious natural death in presidential history. The case where the cover-up was more obvious than the crime. Warren G. Harding, the president who died at exactly the right time for everyone except the truth. Number 4, James Garfield. Here's a case that shows sometimes the real killer isn't the one holding the gun. This is the story of a president who survived an assassin's bullet, only to be slowly tortured to death by his own doctors. A medical horror story that would change American medicine forever. James Garfield should have lived. The bullet that was supposed to kill him missed every vital organ. He should have recovered in a few weeks and served out his presidency. Instead, he endured 80 days of agony before dying from infections that his doctors gave him. This is the story of how American medicine killed a president. Garfield was the ultimate self-made man. Born in a log cabin, he worked as a canal boat driver to pay for school, became a college president, a Civil War general, and finally a congressman. In 1880, he won the presidency almost by accident at a deadlocked Republican convention. But his presidency was doomed from day one. The problem was patronage, the corrupt system where presidents rewarded supporters with government jobs. Garfield wanted to reform it. That made him enemies, especially among the stalwart Republicans who made fortunes from political appointments. One of these disappointed office seekers was Charles Julius Guiteau, a failed lawyer and religious fanatic who believed God had chosen him for greatness. Guiteau had written one speech supporting Garfield during the campaign and convinced himself this made him deserving of a high diplomatic post. When Garfield refused to make him ambassador to France, Guiteau snapped. On July 2, 1881, Garfield was walking through the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station in Washington, heading to his college reunion in Massachusetts. He was in a great mood, chatting with Secretary of State James Blaine about their summer plans. At 9:30 a.m., Guiteau stepped out from behind a pillar, pulled out a .44 caliber revolver and fired 2 shots. The first bullet grazed Garfield's arm. The second hit him in the back, just below the right shoulder blade. Garfield collapsed, blood spreading across his white shirt. "My God, what is this?" he gasped. Guiteau made no attempt to escape. He calmly handed his gun to a police officer and announced, "I am a stalwart of the stalwarts. Arthur is president now." He was referring to Vice President Chester Arthur, a member of the corrupt stalwart faction. But here's the crucial fact. The bullet that hit Garfield was not fatal. Modern ballistics experts have analyzed the trajectory. The bullet entered Garfield's back, cracked a rib, and lodged in tissue behind his pancreas. It missed his spine, his heart, his lungs, and every major blood vessel. In 1981, Ronald Reagan survived a much more serious gunshot wound and was back to work in 2 weeks. Garfield's wound should have been even less dangerous. So why did he die? The answer lies in the horrifying state of American medical practice in 1881. Within minutes of the shooting, doctors swarmed around the fallen president. The problem was, none of them had any idea what they were doing. American doctors in 1881 didn't believe in germs. They thought infection was caused by bad air, not bacteria. They rarely washed their hands and never sterilized their instruments. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Europe, doctors were already practicing antiseptic surgery. Joseph Lister had proven that carbolic acid could prevent infections. European surgeons were washing their hands and sterilizing instruments. But American doctors rejected these foreign ideas. They considered themselves too smart to learn from Europeans. Dr. Bliss was particularly arrogant. When other physicians suggested trying antiseptic methods, he refused. When they questioned his treatment, he banned them from seeing the president. As the days passed, Garfield developed a raging fever. Pus poured from his wound. His weight dropped from 210 pounds to 130 pounds. He was literally being eaten alive by infection. The entire nation watched in horror. Newspapers published daily bulletins about the president's condition. The stock market crashed. People prayed in churches across the country. Desperate to help, inventor Alexander Graham Bell rushed to the White House with a primitive metal detector he had invented to locate the bullet. But even Bell's device was foiled by the metal bed springs that Dr. Bliss insisted on using. The bullet remained lost somewhere in Garfield's body, but that wasn't really the problem. The problem was the massive infections the doctors had introduced. By August, Garfield's condition was hopeless. His body was consumed with sepsis. Multiple abscesses had formed throughout his abdomen. The smell of rotting flesh filled his room. Garfield knew he was dying. "This is not death," he whispered to his wife. "This is dying, and they cannot tell the difference." In a desperate attempt to help him recover, doctors moved Garfield to a seaside cottage in New Jersey, hoping the ocean air would help. It was too late. On September 19, 1881, 80 days after being shot, James A. Garfield finally died. The official cause was blood poisoning and infection, not the gunshot wound. The autopsy revealed the horrible truth. The bullet had created a small, harmless cyst. It was nowhere near any vital organs. But the doctor's repeated probing had created a 20-inch infected channel through Garfield's body. Dr. Bliss had literally carved a path of destruction through the president's abdomen with his dirty instruments. At Guiteau's trial, the assassin's defense lawyers made a startling argument. Their client hadn't killed Garfield. The doctors had. "I just shot him," Guiteau declared. "The doctors killed him. I am not guilty of murder." Medically speaking, he was right, but legally he was still responsible. Guiteau was convicted and hanged. But the real tragedy was what Garfield's death revealed about American medicine. European doctors who examined the autopsy results were appalled. They confirmed that Garfield would have survived if treated with basic antiseptic procedures. The president had been tortured to death by medical ignorance and arrogance. Garfield's death became a turning point. American medical schools began teaching antiseptic surgery. Doctors started washing their hands and sterilizing instruments. The age of scientific medicine in America finally began. Ironically, James A. Garfield's greatest contribution to his country may have been his death. His 80 days of agony forced American medicine to join the modern world. But it came too late for the brilliant, self-made president who should have lived. James A. Garfield was killed not by an assassin's bullet, but by his doctor's pride. The case that proved sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease. Number 5. Zachary Taylor, the exhumed president. This is the story of a president whose death was so controversial that 141 years later, they actually dug him up to solve the mystery. The only president in history whose body was exhumed to test for murder. And what they found will surprise you. Zachary Taylor never wanted to be president. He was a career soldier, a rough frontier warrior who'd spent 40 years fighting Indians and Mexicans. He'd never even voted in an election before running for one. But in 1848, America wanted a war hero, and Taylor was the biggest hero they had. Old Rough and Ready had never lost a battle. At the Battle of Buena Vista, he defeated a Mexican army 3 times larger than his own. The Whig Party nominated him almost as a joke. Taylor knew nothing about politics. He didn't even know what party he belonged to. When he got the nomination letter, he refused to pay the postage and almost didn't receive it. But Americans loved his honesty and plain speaking. Taylor won the presidency while admitting he had no idea what he was doing. What killed him was politics he didn't understand. By 1850, the country was splitting apart over slavery. California wanted to join the Union as a free state. Southern politicians threatened secession. Congress was deadlocked over the Compromise of 1850. Taylor, despite owning slaves himself, opposed the expansion of slavery. He wanted California admitted as a free state immediately. This enraged Southern politicians who expected the Louisiana slaveholder to support their cause. The tension reached a breaking point during the summer of 1850. Death threats poured into the White House. Southern newspapers called Taylor a traitor. Politicians whispered about assassination. Then came July 4, 1850. Washington was celebrating the holiday with a massive festival on the National Mall. Despite the blazing heat, Taylor insisted on attending the ceremonies at the Washington Monument. For hours, the 65-year-old president stood in the scorching sun listening to boring speeches. The temperature hit 90 degrees. Taylor was sweating through his heavy wool uniform, but he refused to leave. After the ceremony, Taylor was exhausted and overheated. Back at the White House, he desperately tried to cool down. He drank glass after glass of ice-cold milk. He devoured bowl after bowl of fresh cherries and other cold fruits. His staff warned him to slow down, but Taylor kept eating and drinking. He consumed massive quantities of cold dairy and fruit, trying to beat the heat. Within hours, he was violently ill. Taylor developed severe stomach cramps and explosive diarrhea. He vomited repeatedly. His fever spiked. The White House doctor, Alexander Witherspoon, diagnosed gastroenteritis, inflammation of the stomach and intestines. For 5 agonizing days, Taylor grew worse. He couldn't keep food down. He was constantly dehydrated. His skin turned yellow. He weakened rapidly. On July 9th, knowing he was dying, Taylor called his family to his bedside. "I have always done my duty," he whispered. "I regret nothing, but I am sorry I am about to leave my friends." At 10:35 p.m., Zachary Taylor was dead. He had been president for just 16 months. The official cause was gastroenteritis caused by consuming too much cold food and drink on a hot day. Case closed. But almost immediately, rumors began spreading. Taylor's sudden illness came at the most convenient possible moment for his political enemies. The Compromise of 1850, which Taylor had opposed, passed easily under his successor, Millard Fillmore. Southern politicians who had been threatening Taylor were suspiciously quiet after his death. Some were heard saying the country was better off without him. Then there were the symptoms: severe stomach pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and yellow skin. These were classic signs of arsenic poisoning, not just food poisoning. The timeline was suspicious too. Taylor fell ill within hours of eating at a public event where anyone could have tampered with his food. And why would cold milk and cherries kill a tough frontier soldier who had survived 40 years of military campaigns? For decades, historians debated Taylor's death. Some insisted it was natural, others suspected murder. The controversy reached a peak in the 1990s when author William Rising wrote a book claiming Taylor had been assassinated by pro-slavery politicians. Rising argued that Taylor's opposition to the Compromise of 1850 had made him too dangerous to live. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Taylor's death was perfectly timed to benefit his enemies. His symptoms matched arsenic poisoning. And several people at the July 4th event had both motive and opportunity. But there was only one way to know for sure. In 1991, Taylor's descendants agreed to something unprecedented. They would allow the president's body to be exhumed and tested for poison. On June 17, 1991, exactly 141 years after Taylor's death, scientists opened his tomb in Louisville, Kentucky. The mahogany coffin was remarkably well preserved. Inside, Taylor's remains were mostly intact. Samples of hair, fingernails, and tissue were sent to Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee for testing. They used the most advanced forensic techniques available to detect even trace amounts of arsenic. The entire nation waited for the results. 2 months later, the lab announced its findings. No arsenic. Taylor's remains contained only normal background levels of the poison, far too little to cause death. The president had not been murdered, so what really killed Zachary Taylor? Modern medical experts believe the official diagnosis was correct. Taylor died from acute gastroenteritis, possibly caused by contaminated food or water. The July 4th heat, combined with his age and the stress of his office, made the illness fatal. The cold milk and cherries didn't kill him. They were just the last things he ate before getting sick from something else. Taylor's yellow skin was probably jaundice from dehydration, not arsenic poisoning. His other symptoms, while dramatic, were consistent with severe food poisoning. But the exhumation revealed something interesting. Taylor had been slowly poisoning himself for years. Tests showed high levels of lead in his system, probably from drinking water that ran through lead pipes. This chronic lead poisoning may have weakened his immune system and made him more susceptible to the gastroenteritis that killed him. Ironically, Zachary Taylor was being poisoned, just not by his political enemies. The exhumation finally put the murder theories to rest. Taylor died from natural causes, probably severe food poisoning complicated by chronic lead exposure and the stress of being president during a national crisis. But the fact that his family agreed to the exhumation shows how persistent the conspiracy theories were. For 141 years, enough people suspected murder that they were willing to dig up a president to prove it. Zachary Taylor's death wasn't a political assassination. It was just a tragic reminder that in 1850, even presidents could be killed by bad food and primitive medical care.